Hello everyone and welcome to this presentation on coastal tourism in the European Union, from COVID-19 shock to recovery. My name is Ricardo Barranco and I work at the European Commission Joint Research Center, specifically at the Territorial Development Unit GRCB3. Below my picture you can see my personal Gmail account because I'm still within contract, but below that Gmail account you can see what is expected to be my future working email. So let's start. This presentation will start giving an overview on coastal tourism in the European Union. Then it will focus on tourism capacity, on coastal areas, tourism expenditure, tourism vulnerability, and tourist segments by using Google Trends. It will finalize by looking at COVID-19 impact on coastal tourism. At the end, I'll leave you with some reference in case you want to go a little bit deeper on this subject. Coastal areas and islands tend to be major tourism hotspots in Europe. Their unique characteristics make them ideal places for leisure and tourism activities to take role. Tourism is particularly important for certain countries, mainly in Southern Europe, like Spain, Portugal, Italy, Greece, but also in other countries, namely Croatia, Bulgaria, Romania, and even the Netherlands. The sun, sea and sand, 3S tourism, accounts for a significant amount of total national revenue in these countries. Both gross value added, GVA, and the number of jobs in coastal regions represent almost 90% of the total EU, only surpassed by cities and urbanized regions. Much of this share is generated by tourism-related activities and services, both directly, indirectly, and induced. On the map on the right, you see what's the regions that we are classified as coastal in blue, but also the other ones classified as cities, urban mix, mountainous nature, and rural. This is what we called and defined as regional tourism typologies. Within these coastal areas, we have the coastal zones that are defined and delineated by applying a 10-kilometer straight line buffer to the coastal line. If an area is both a city and a coastal zone, for example like Barcelona and Copenhagen, then we assume the city is the main driver of visitors. Otherwise, that region is classified as being coastal. Below the map, you have the night spent per regional typology per country. We can see the night spent in some countries, like for example Cyprus and Malta, are very much dominated by this coastal tourism, while in other countries like Slovakia, Luxembourg and Austria and Hungary are by the other regional typologies. The tourism capacity was calculated based on a non-conventional high-resolution 100 square meter hotel grid layer with the number of rooms in tourism accommodation in 2018. This was extracted by using web scraping from online platforms like Booking.com and TripAdvisor. By combining this high resolution and very fine-grained layer with official statistics, we're able to calculate the regional tourism capacity, the seasonality, expenditure, employment, typology, and vulnerability indicators. And these indicators were analyzed for 1,395 EU NUTS3 regions. So if we look at tourism capacity per country, we see that the top 5 countries are Italy, Spain, Greece, France and Croatia, going from over 900,000 rooms for Italy to Croatia over 340,000 rooms. While on the other hand, we have the bottom 5 countries with less coastal capacity, mainly Estonia, Lithuania, Finland, Slovenia and Latvia with only 1,500 rooms. Because we have this fine grain and the location of each hotel room and the hotel accommodation and the number of corresponding rooms, we're able also to go a little bit deeper from country level also to regional level. And we see that Mallorca in Spain has over 173,000 rooms, Rhodes in Greece 170,000 rooms, Burgas in Bulgaria 109,000, Algarve in Portugal 105,000 and Istria, Croatia with 101,000 rooms. These are the top 5 regions with more tourism capacity, so are able to accommodate more tourists. Because we have the number and the location of rooms at the fine grain at the 100 square meter, we're able to see within these coastal regions which are the share of rooms that are within these coastal zone within 10 kilometers from the coastline, and the remaining rooms that are within the region. And we see that for southern Portugal, Spain, southern Italy, Croatia, Greece and Bulgaria, but also in Denmark and parts of northern Germany and Poland, these shares are very high. So we have the dark blue there represented on the map, and those usually represent over 80% of the rooms are located within this 10 kilometers buffer line. Here on the map, what we have on the graph, what we have is both the sum of the rooms, but also the average rooms per region. And what we see is Cyprus has the highest average number of rooms with over 76,000, and this is because the entire island being considered just one region. That's why this has this very high value. But together with Bulgaria, with around 53,000, Croatia 49,000, Romania 46,000 rooms per region on average, are the countries with the highest average. On the other side, on the lower averages, are found on Estonia with 4,000, Netherlands around also 4,000, and Finland with just 1,500 coastal rooms per region. According to our initial definition on the previous slides, the fact that many rooms are located in coastal cities make them being classified as urban and not coastal. This might partially explain why lower Dutch and Finnish values here represented on the graph. The sum are the blue bars, and the average number of rooms per region are the orange dots. Now going to another topic, tourism expenditure. We see that the EU level, the majority of the tourism expenditure is generated in summer months and takes place in coastal regions. They are represented on the graph on the left. Such regions are predominantly oriented to beach tourism and thus highly affected by seasonality. In 2018, the total night spend was over 95 million, with an exceptional summer peak reaching over 73 billion euros and representing 41% of the annual tourism expenditure on the coastal regions. Moreover, the majority of the night spend in islands and coasts originated from foreign tourists, resulting in 113 billion euros. In general, these regions have also higher tourism intensity levels, with an average 12.3 nights spent per local inhabitant, turning them among some of the most vulnerable to shocks in tourism sector, mainly the Mediterranean area, the Atlantic coast, the Baltic and the Black Sea. Now looking a little bit more closely on the graphs, on the one on the left, we see that we have the graph split by the 5 typologies: cities, urban mix, coast, nature and rural, but also disaggregation by season, spring, summer, autumn and winter. If we look at the coast, we see that the summer, there represented in yellow, has a very high peak, and that's what we just mentioned. It's this type of typology that has the highest seasonality. On the other hand, the graph on the right gives us the total expenditure by tourism origin. And again, we see on the coastals, it's the one the most dependent on intra-EU tourism and extra-EU, while the domestic tourists, the ones also from within each country, represented the lower share. This means again that this type of coastal areas are very much dependent on foreign tourists, people coming from abroad. So we briefly mentioned vulnerability on the previous slide. Let's look a little bit more into depth. The Tourist Vulnerability Index is calculated taking into account 2 indicators: the tourism intensity and seasonality. Tourism intensity is computed as the ratio of regional tourists per resident, while the seasonality is the degree to which touristic activity is concentrated in one season. Regions with more tourists per inhabitant, with higher intensity, and where touristic activity is concentrated in shorter periods, higher seasonality, are considered more vulnerable. Regions with higher tourism vulnerability are also those where employment generated by tourism activity is most important. And that's what we have here on the left. We have the map which shows us that the red areas, the ones the regions represented by very high tourism vulnerability in red, then in orange the ones with a high vulnerability, yellow with a medium vulnerability, and the green with the low vulnerability. And we see that coastal areas are very much affected and represented by the red and orange classes. This index is a peer-reviewed research that we developed a couple of years ago within our group. Then when we look at the contribution of tourism sector to regional employment, we see that very high vulnerability, it's where the tourism reaches over 18%. So we see that the employment is very much located in these more vulnerable areas. Also, looking at the vulnerability, we see that both night spend accommodation rooms in coastal areas are mainly located in very high vulnerable regions, with 74 and 77% respectively. These values stress how much coasts and islands are vulnerable to impacts in the tourism sector, like the COVID-19 pandemic, especially if we estimate that tourism-related activities in coastal areas contribute to about 8 million jobs in EU 27 and for around 40% of the total employment in tourism sector. And that's what we have here on the graph on the right. We see that the very high vulnerable regions, it's where the big share of night spender rooms are concentrated, making them quite important, but also making tourism very prone to be affected by shocks. Now let's look a little bit on other type of data, mainly on how to use Google Trends and Google searches to analyze tourism segments. Google Trends analyze the popularity of top search queries on Google Search across regions, languages, and time. It allows comparing the relative search volume of certain searches between two or more terms. Since at the moment that we developed this analysis in 2020, there was still a lack of exaggerated and refined data on the COVID-19 impact on tourism. We thought that the Google Trend could be used as a proxy of the tourism interest. Due to its nature, the data in this case may be mainly related with non-domestic tourists seeking further information on potential foreign and international destinations. 6 segments were developed, and each one of them were constructed by putting together sets of 20 words covering popular activities, sites, and destinations. For example, the keywords for the sun and beach segment include beach and surf keywords. The data used in this analysis was collected by the World Travel and Tourism Council, WTTC. For the following analysis, the EU countries considered were Denmark, France, Germany, Greece, Italy, Netherlands, Portugal, and Spain. For the non-EU countries, all the remaining, giving a total around 34% considered countries. When we look at the following slide, we see a graph that gives us the Google search trends for the sun and beach segment comparing 2020 to the previous year of 2019. And we have on the x-axis the timeline going from January 2020 till December 2020, and split by the EU countries mentioned previously and the other remaining non-EU countries. What we see here is the drop or the change relative to the previous year, and there's a noticeable decrease in the sun and beach searches in the beginning of March 2020, reaching a decrease of over 60% for EU countries and around 40% for non-EU countries. This March 2020 is represented on the gray vertical line there on the graph. This is coincident with the first widespread lockdowns initiated by national governments on March 2020. The slight recovery in May 2020 is due to the gradual lift of most travel restrictions. During the rest of the year, values in the EU fluctuated around minus 40% compared to the previous years. what we see is the EU had throughout most of the year the highest decrease in searches, but only in the period July and August was the decrease more evident in non-EU countries. Overall, since March 2020, the percentage change in non-EU countries was on average minus 32, while within the European Union was minus 41%. Now that we saw the distinction for the sun and beach, a segment for EU and non-EU countries, let's look at the difference and compare it, the sun and beach segment, with other touristic segments. Mainly the adventure segment, cultural, tourism, urban, family and travel services. What we see is the sun and beach is the segment where Google searches decreased the most since March 2020. They are represented on the graph on the dark blue line. As stated before, it had a drop on average of minus 41% relatively to the previous year. The other segments are followed by urban and family with minus 38%, cultural with minus 34%, travel services with minus 28%, and the less affected tourism segment was the adventure with only a drop of minus 60%. During the entire post-lockdown, so following the March 2020, the adventure segment was the relatively most searched. During summer, travel services follow a very similar pattern and trajectory, with the second list decreasing. This could be linked with the adventure activities and locations where they take place are often require a tour and local operator. And that's exactly what we have here on the map. We have here during the summer the adventure and travel services, the two highest one, while the sun and the beach, clearly with the dark blue line, is the one throughout the year with the lowest levels. So now that we have a full assessment of the coastal tourism in Europe, let's look at some of the challenges that happen due to the COVID-19 impact on these same regions. The travel and the tourism is among the most affected sector by the COVID-19 pandemic. Global travel restrictions has led to a substantial reduction of international demand, and the health crisis is linked to a change in tourist preferences that may persist beyond the short term. Tourists have been looking for more national and nature-based low touristic destinations, like we saw now with the Google Trends, and the coastal areas are considered overcrowded destinations and they have been disproportionately impacted. These coastal areas is where the largest drops in local spending and also the highest rise in unemployment have happened. This is due to the significant retail, hospitality and tourism sector compositions in their local economies. It's frequent for the smallest seaside towns to have greater dependence on the tourism sector as key employer and driver of economic activity. Coastal seasonality, like we saw on the first slides, exacerbates this problem. The crisis began at a very bad timing, at the end of the winter, usually when business have lower cash values. Coastal activities usually rely on Easter as a necessary input boost for stabilizing finances and repay debts from the winter. So what's the vision we want for the coastal tourism? Studies point that tourists are willing to pay more for safer vacations, and the COVID-19 recovery could join the ongoing global transformation of the current economy system to a carbon neutral footprint together with new market trends. This is a transformative opportunity leading to a greater and faster adaptation of more sustainable environmental solutions and a greater social appreciation of coastal nature and cultural values. The European Commission European Green Deal can help in such green transitions thanks to policy reforms, developing specific financial mechanisms and supporting innovation, digitalization, education and training of local operators. During this entire presentation, we saw the importance of collecting and using high-resolution data to better assess coastal areas, shocks, ongoing trends, but also to delineate appropriate policies. Now I leave you here with some references, mainly the EU Blue Economy Report, highlighted on the first one, where these figures and maps are represented. Below it, we have I show you some of the relevant publications, policy and technical reports that help us get to this point, get to some of the resulting graphs, maps, and conclusions here presented. I thank you for the attention, and if you have any doubt, please don't hesitate to contact me through my personal email or by using LinkedIn, and I hope to see you on the 16th for some of the discussion on this presentation. Thank you again, and have a good day.